Mordechai Nomi, first of all, Mazel Tov. We're very excited and looking forward to celebrating the Simcha together with you. I guess I want to start by just a little bit introduction. Firstly, why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And the reason is because Mordechai is the first Chosson in the family, in the next generation. And, I was looking back to, when I was engaged and, what I was taught and what I learned in preparation for getting married. And, I felt like I really got very little hadracha, and the hadracha that I got was not super helpful. And so, having been married for, close to 18 years, I certainly learned a lot. And I thought maybe, I could be helpful by sharing some of my experiences and some of my thoughts to maybe help you guys get started a little bit. And that being said, I also want to point out that I am by no means a subject matter expert, and I think I'm hoping that there are some things that I could help share that might be helpful, but at the same time I want to make that caveat. So you're welcome to take what you like, discard what you don't. We could certainly talk more in person if you want, or talk with anyone else if you have questions about any of these ideas. Also, a lot of what I'm saying does have sources in Chazal, but I'm not really going to mention most of them. Maybe a little bit here and there, but not everything is for sure. But I didn't really have time to prepare all the sources. A, and B, I didn't think this really should be a Torah shir. It's just some ideas. So I'll just share the ideas, whatever they are, and that'll be that. One of the things that I feel like maybe I could benefit is my own experiences, like I mentioned. But also I had the opportunity to learn a lot from some really amazing people. I had great rabbeim and great teachers, and maybe there was something that I learned that I could give over. So I'll just mention, I'm not gonna quote, for the most part I'm not gonna quote people. I don't always remember who I heard something from, and I also don't want to misquote anybody or try to say over something with their authority without maybe having it 100% clear. So I'm just going to say again the ideas, but I do want to give just for the record the I think of the people that I learned most from in terms of maybe where I got some of the shape of my perspective. So probably a lot from the Rosh Yeshiva and my parents, and the other two people that I think were most formative for me was learning from Dr. Goldman and Uncle Aryeh. So I do want to put that out there just to give a lot of credit there. I'm gonna probably steal a lot of ideas that I heard from them without giving them credit, but again, I think it's to everybody's benefit if I don't do that. But most of these ideas are not my own. So just putting that out there. The first thing I think I want to talk about is just conceptual, a few conceptual ideas, and then I'll talk a little bit about some practical ideas, and then lastly I'll talk a little bit about intimacy, to touch a little bit on that subject. So for the conceptual ideas, I actually think that part maybe is the most important. Because when it comes to anything in life like relationships or parenting or whatever it might be, I think every family, every person, every situation is very unique, and a lot of people try to give practical advice, and I always felt like practical advice is very limited because every person has to take the concepts and figure out how they apply in real life, and learning the concepts is a challenge and there's a lot to learn. But I always felt like learning it was the easier part, and the hardest part was like figuring out how the concepts apply to you in your life in an honest way and appropriately. And that side I think is much more complicated and takes a lot of shikol and das Torah, etc. So I always felt like it's better to just give the concepts, and then let people figure out for themselves like how to take that and translate that. There definitely is room, I think, and benefit from practical advice. But like it's really like I always felt like it falls short when I hear practical advice. Like I'm always like, I don't know if it applies, or I don't know if it's true in all the cases, or whatever it might be. So I want to start with just the conceptual ideas, um, and take it from there. So the first idea I think is super important. Actually, let me just make one other point, which is for everything that I'm gonna say in this conversation, is that probably a lot of things that I'm gonna say are things that you already know, things that are pretty obvious even. So firstly, I apologize if I'm wasting your time to some extent, and if you don't find as much benefit as this as could be. So I don't know, but I think that the benefit might be not necessarily to introduce a new idea, but maybe to like clarify and expound or explain to a certain extent some of the ideas, but also to like focus on what the Ikarim are, and to give like a framework of what are the important ingredients and relationships. And so it's like maybe focusing on figuring out like what exactly the focus is, and maybe just giving that as a basic framework, or at least partial framework, and to maybe just see how things fit together and maybe expound on them a little bit. But in no means are these intended to be like great chidushim. So anyway, okay. So the first concept, I think we'd start with the question, which is Chazal talk about how important marriage is and how essential it is for a person to be married, and really even from the basic point, Hashem, and if you go back to the beginning, Hashem says, Lo tovei adam levado, and so Hashem creates Chava and really created man and woman with the intent that this would be how they would function best, would be to be married, to be man and woman, live together. So so the question is like if it's so important and it's so essential, and it was like all the way back to the beginning of how we were created to be in this situation, so then like why is it such a rarity to have like a really really amazing marriage? Well, they're there. It's certainly they're there. It's not like they're hard to find, but like it's probably the overwhelming minority of marriages are really really amazing. And why is that? Why is it so hard to find? And so I think that the reason is because in the secular world for sure, but even to a large extent, I think even in the frum world, it's the lack of understanding or focus on this first concept. And to introduce the first concept, I want to just back to a very basic question, a very basic understanding, which is talking about what the purpose of the world was, what the purpose of creation was. So if you look into Mesilas Yesharim in the beginning, he says that this world was created as a entryway in the prosdor before Olam Haba, and the purpose is really to achieve Olam Haba, and that's where the main Hana, the Ikar Hana that a person was created for, is realized. So the question, the famous question is like, why, if this whole world was just an entryway to Olam Haba, and there we're supposed to get all this Hana from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be Nene Miziv Shechinaso, so then why not just create a person in that situation? Why have to do Olam Hazeh first? The one basic answer that I've heard is that a person doesn't benefit, doesn't appreciate something that they get if it's given to them as much. If they work for it and they earn it, they have a greater appreciation for it and for its value. And if Hashem would just give us the Olam Haba first, it would be like the terminology is Namadik Isufa. It would be the bread of shame that we didn't earn it ourselves. But if you look in Derech Hashem, the Ramchal, in the beginning, I think it's the first parak, beginning of the first parak, it gives a more profound understanding of the answer to this question, which is really an amazing idea. And that is that he says that the nature of the enjoyment in Olam Haba is Dveikos B'Hashem. We're Nana Miziv Shchinasa, we're Davek B'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And the way that a person is Davek to Hashem is by being Mizdama to Hashem, is to be similar to Hashem. The more similar a person is to Hashem, the more they're able to be Davek to Hashem. So I actually learned this a little bit. I had an interesting insight into this concept from watching my baby Mira actually play with other people. She's so cute, but she's a very relational person by nature. And even though she's a little kid, she's 3. I observed her when she was playing with other kids that like she wants to do exactly what the other person does. Like if you're holding a baby that's wrapped in a certain way, then I want to do that exact thing. Or if you're pushing a stroller, then I'm going to push a stroller. And she's not like a kid that doesn't have her own mind. She's very much does have her own mind, and she's very like stubborn and strong-willed. So it's not just that she's copying, but it's like she wants to be with you, and she wants to like do what you're doing, and like by doing this thing together, like I'm bonding with you, I'm like together with you. And it was just like an interesting like wow, that like clicked a little bit, this idea of being Davek to Hashem and like being similar, and I'm with you, and I'm doing what you're doing, and like we're together. So maybe that's a little bit of insight as to how that works. But regardless, the Ramchal does say that, and so he says that if Hashem is Shalem, and Hashem Shlemus is inherent, no one gave Hashem Shlemus, and so if Hashem would create us with Shlemus, then we would by definition be different than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because his shleimus was not given to him by any outside being, and ours was. And so Hashem put us in this world with Bechira in order that we should be able to earn the schar and earn the shleimus and develop our own shleimus, and therefore that shleimus that we have wasn't given to us by Kadosh Baruch Hu, but it's something that we have inherently by ourselves. And so that allows, only through that mechanism is a person able to get the maximum dveikus b'Hashem that's possible in Olam Haba. So this whole world was necessary for that. So what does that have to do with marriage? So really, if we take this idea, then we understand that the whole purpose of the world, the purpose of the universe, the purpose of creation was that a person should be in this world to achieve shleimus, to be mashlam his midos, to fulfill the mitzvahs and to serve Hashem, and which helps a person achieve shleimus, and then to be able to achieve the schar in Olam Haba. So, in a person's life, the opportunity to achieve shleimus is probably most, the area where he's able to grow the most is through his marriage or her marriage. And marriage, Uncle Aryeh often refers to it as Midos laboratory. And being in that situation really puts someone in a situation where they have to really develop and grow and perfect themselves. And so that is really like a big part of achieving shleimus in life, and a person is able to do that most in marriage. And then even taking it to the next step, Meretz Hashem, when a person has children, there maybe even, this is my own, addition, so I don't know, I think it's mistaver to say that, when a person has a child, when a couple has a child, so they're even, in that way, they're even taking this histamas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the next level, because they're participating in creating another person and giving to them and being a meitiv. And Hashem's nature, what we know of Hashem's nature as Hashem's midos is that he's a meitiv, and he's always giving, and all of his other midos, rachum and chanun, all of those fundamental midos that a person needs to be successful in marriage and to be successful as a parent. So when a person is put into that situation, it really forces them to grow in a huge way. Another practical point I just want to add here is that the again, I think I heard this from someone else, but I'm just gonna I'll just share it, that marriage tends to bring out it challenges a person wherever their greatest flaws are. If a person has a certain flaw or a certain shortcoming in their personality, that tends to be the area that they struggle with, or their greatest challenges are in their marriage. And the reason why it works like that is because marriage is so broad and so all encompassing that it requires a person to really fire on all cylinders. Every aspect of your personality is going to be challenged and called into play to function in that relationship to be successful. So it sort of like finds your flaws and brings them out, because whichever areas you particularly struggle with, those are definitely going to come up somewhere in your relationship, and those are going to be, tend to be the areas that that you're going to have to work on yourself most to make it work. Um, so, you know, what in the secular world, there's a lot of books that talk about marriage and relationships and how to be sensitive and how to understand your spouse and how to work on yourself and how to develop it and how to communicate it and how to everything, right? But when you boil it all down, the bottom line is always that, and that therefore you're going to be happy. Therefore you're going to be in a good marriage. Therefore, your wife is or husband is going to do what you want to do. And the end of the game is always that this is how you achieve your own needs. This is how you get your needs met, get your way, get happiness and contentment in life. And so in the end, it always comes down to being self-serving, even though it is about being sensitive and about caring for another person in the context of a relationship. But the bottom line is that that's how I make myself happy. So in this perspective that I'm sharing is I think what is the Torah ideal is that, we get into a relationship like this, and it's really part of all of our interpersonal relationships. And that is that it's our Avodas Hashem, it's our quest for Shleimus, and it's so important that this is the purpose of the entire thing. This is why the world was created. And so without this idea, when ultimately your relationship is just based on, ultimately finding happiness, it really limits a person, because number one, it's much less firepower, and it only motivates you so much. And number two is that when the going gets tough and a person's faced with really coming up against their limitations and challenges in their marriage, if the whole reason is because it makes you happy, at a certain point in time, it could, be underwater. That equation could be underwater, and you could be like, "Wow, this isn't making me happy, or why am I doing this? Why would I want to continue if the whole reason for me doing this is my own selfishness?" And so when a person has a broader perspective of understanding the importance of self-perfection and shleimus and selflessness and doing for another and being a native and fulfilling the purpose of creation, so it gives the person so much more firepower, number one. And number two, it's bigger than me, and whether I'm happy or not happy, or where it's easy or it's hard, or it's whatever it is, when the going gets tough, you have to keep coming back to the table, and you have to keep working on it, because this is the ideal in life. This is what you understand your life is all about. It's also extremely helpful because so much of a relationship is about being selfless and about being a giver. And if you're, focusing on this as being just the kind of person you want to be and the ideal that you're trying to live your life as, it gives a good, basis and a good setting for that type of relationship to flourish on that. But again, if it's ultimately self-serving, then it doesn't quite it's all built on kind of a shaky foundation. So I think going into a relationship in this way and throughout your relationship in Mirza Hashem, being able to focus on this ideal is like super, super important. And a lot of issues I think that happen in marriages come ultimately from a sense of person being selfish and wanting to get their way or get their needs met. And if this ideal was there as the foundation, I think a lot of marriages would be a lot better. So just a few more points on this topic and how it works. There's an idea Musar called Chinuch HaMusar, Just very briefly, the Rashiva taught that the Bali Musar classified Musar into three branches. The first branch is Chachmas HaMusar, which is like learning, understanding the concepts of Musar. The second one is Musar B'Spailas, which is sort of like a meditation, I guess is the way I understand it, is meditating on a certain concept and trying to absorb it into yourself. And the third was this idea of Chinuch HaMusar, which was acting out the midos that you're trying to inculcate in yourself. And the Rashiva said that this third branch of Chinuch HaMusar is the most powerful of the three, and he had shmuzim that brought out this idea that are very beautiful that I'm not going to say over now. But I just want to mention one quick chazal that brings this out, which is the Sefer HaChinuch, I think in Parshas Bo, and he talks about the mitzvahs of Karban Pesach, and there's like a whole bunch of mitzvahs on the same thing, that just little facets of the Karban Pesach. There's like 17 mitzvahs or something like that, and not to break a bone, not to leave it over at night, and not to roast it, to eat it with matzamar, etc., etc., etc. And all of these mitzvahs are really the same thing. He's trying to give you like, what's the shorish of these mitzvahs, like zecher tias mitzrayim, zecher for the cheiros, etc., etc. But it's like very, very repetitive. And at some point in the middle, he says, why do we have so many mitzvahs for this one idea? Like, why couldn't we just have one mitzvah and that would be it? And so he says that an idea that I think is a very, very fundamental concept in all of Torah, which is that the way Hashem created a person is that achar ha'pu'ula nimshach halev, that the way a person acts, his heart is drawn. And so by doing these, by acting out all these mitzvahs that teach us about these ideas, it brings it into our personality in a much, much deeper way. And so that's why there's so many mitzvahs, because the concept is so important. And I think this is true with many of the mitzvahs, which is kind of unique in Judaism, is that there's so many active mitzvahs that we do with our bodies, and not just davening and learning and whatever, but we have like the Seder, and we put on tefillin every morning, and we shake a lulav and esrog, and we do all these active things. And I think a lot of the secret to why we do so many of these things is because of this concept. And so again, this is why marriage is so critical and so important, because through this relationship and through working on yourself, you're actively acting out the midos that you need to inculcate in yourself and being mashlim yourself. And you don't necessarily start off there. You start off wherever you are, and it's a slow process that you eventually develop and become greater and greater person through it. There's two midos that I want to just be mefared a little bit, that I think are critical to understand and be aware of going into marriage. I think maybe are the two foundational midos in relationships. And the first one, and they're really very interconnected. The first one is the midah of anivus, and the second one is the midah of akar satov. So one of the reasons why anivus is so critical, obviously, because when it comes to interpersonal relationships, obviously being humble is the key to many, many, many traits that allow a person to be successful in his relationships with others. And another reason why anivus is so important is because it leads a person to being a makir tov. If a person has humility, they're able to see that they don't deserve everything in the world, and everything that they have, they're able to say, wow, it's amazing that I have this. And when it comes to being in a relationship, your whole world is this other person, and same thing vice versa. And when a person has gaiva, then it leads them to feel that they deserve everything. They deserve every possible good that's in there. Nothing in the world that could be beneficial is good enough for a Baal Gaiva. And so they're not able to be within their Dalet Amos and be happy and to have a Kar Satov. They're much more likely to exhibit a lot of other negative midos too, like being angry and being makbid and all these other things that come from Gaiva. But Anivus is so important in the personal space, but also in the idea of being mistapik with what you have, what Hashem gives you. And no matter how great a person is, no matter how great a spouse is, no matter how great a marriage is, there is a need for a person to be mistapik with what they have and to be happy within their relationship. And that really needs to be founded on the midah vanivas. The other part of this is the idea of hakaras hatov. Hakaras hatov is actually, if you learn the Chovos HaLevavos, you see that the midah of hakaras hatov is one of the most essential midos in serving Hashem. And in so many times throughout the Sefer, he talks about all the things that we have to be makir to Kadosh Baruch Hu that He gave us, and that's the foundation for why we're obligated to serve Hashem, why we're obligated to do His Ratzon, is because of all of the good that He did for us. So this mitzvah of Hakaras Hatov is really a bedrock in terms of the whole concept of Avodas Hashem. But in this relationship, there's such an important need to constantly be focusing on Hakaras Hatov, because your spouse dedicated their life to you, and they're constantly doing things for you from morning till night. And if a person was like really tuned in to that in a proper way, and it needs constant reinforcement, but the sense of appreciation and love for the person for all that they did for you would really give a person a boost in terms of simchas hachayim and appreciation and love and willingness to accept whatever it is that they do, or something that happens against your ratzon or your liking. Like, if you're makir tov to all the good that you have, you don't lose sight of that. It minimizes it so much more. And so it's kind of like this idea of mindfulness that's become popular in the secular world, but being mindful of the hakaras hatov that a person has in their relationship, and eventually, if they have children, to be makir tov that their children come from their spouse and come from their relationship with them, and everything they do for their children is also hatava to them. You know, if a person says, my children, like, if I just take for granted that I have children, and if I take for granted the fact that my wife works so hard for my children, they're her children too, but they're also my children, then, you know, you're taking everything that you have and just zeroing it out, like it's taking it for granted, which is wrong, A, and B, like it's such an important tool for a person to be happy and to have simcha and to recognize all the things that they do have. And so a strong focus I think in marriage in general needs to be put on awareness of these two midos, a special emphasis in terms of how to be successful in life in general, but how to be successful in interpersonal relationships and marriage in particular. So I guess that's concept number one. I think, like I said, I think that's really such a super strong foundation and really creates the basis for being successful in marriage, and it's important in life in Avodas Hashem also. The second conceptual idea that I want to share is that it's an idea that I heard from Rav Avigdor Miller, but it struck me as being really like profound idea in marriage, and that is that, you know, in secular thinking, I think this simple, you know, understanding is that the foundation for the marriage relationship is love. And so Rav Miller says that it's actually a big mistake, and that the foundation for marriage is loyalty, not love. And it's actually interesting when you think about it. A person goes into marriage, especially in our circles, with a fairly limited experience with his or her spouse. And love, true love, is not the feeling of infatuation and excitement that a person starts a relationship with somebody. But love is actually a byproduct of a great relationship, a byproduct of marriage that builds and grows over the life of the couple and during their relationship. Love is a product of marriage, but not a prerequisite for it. Otherwise, you would start off with no foundation. And so a person can come into a relationship with a commitment, with loyalty, with understanding of what they're going about and what they're committing themselves to. And that is to dedicate their life to the other person, to building a family together, and to being in this relationship for the rest of their lives. And that sense of loyalty is something that a person can make a commitment to upfront and recognize that that is what they're doing, that's what they're taking upon themselves, and it's not dependent on love. And a mature understanding of love, a person would understand that that's actually not possible to have in the beginning. And so Mirza Hashem, you start with the loyalty and you start with the excitement, and through the relationship and through the giving and through the building and growing together and developing over time, little by little, that deeper, real, mature love grows and grows and continues to grow, and that Mirz Hashem is the byproduct, like I said, of a good relationship. So I think that's pretty much the conceptual part. Um, and I'll just end off with saying that, the ingredients that a person needs to be successful in marriage, or what makes a good marriage good, it's mostly about midos. Good midos is what good marriages are made of. I think people wrongly sometimes think that if you take all the ingredients of the chassan, his personality, his temperament, his experience, etc., and all the ingredients of the kala, and you put them together, those ingredients come out with the finished product. The recipe comes out with this good marriage. And so it's so important to know that all the right ingredients are here and all the right ingredients are there, that they could, that they can have this good result. But I think it's really a mistake. What a person needs is chemistry and common goals, but ultimately it's midos that make a good relationship. And two people, one man, let's say, could have chemistry and common goals with a whole host of different women, and a woman can have the same with many, many different men. And if they have good midos, any of those two could get together and have a successful marriage. No matter how much chemistry they have, no matter how much common goals they have, if they don't have good midos, they're not going to be able to develop a good relationship and a good marriage. But if they do have good midos, then there could be a lot of different factors, but ultimately the midos are what makes the relationship possible. And with each in my example, each different man and different woman would come out with a very different dynamic. It's true. If it was this man versus this man, or this woman versus that woman, the dynamic is going to be very different, and the end result is going to be a very, very different marriage. But it could still be successful if the midos are there. And so what a good marriage is it's really mostly not the ingredients that go into that marriage, but it's how the chassan and kala, or how the couple act in their marriage, that's going to define their success. One of the ingredients that's extremely, extremely important for a strong marriage is trust in the marriage. And I think some of the foundations for trust is that you trust that the other person really has your best interests in mind, and that's what they're focused on, and that they're going to act properly and appropriately in every situation. And when the couple recognizes in each other that they have this commitment to selflessness, and to being a native, and to being a growing person, and to being mashal in themselves, and to develop good midos, that allows a very strong that's a strong energy to produce a sense of trust in a relationship. And that trust is really one of the things that creates the fabric of a good marriage. So with that, I want to get into the next topic, which is to talk about some practical ideas. Mostly can also not super specific, just general ideas. The first thing is that it's good to be aware that, especially at the beginning, marriage, a lot of it's a very big adjustment. It's about adjusting to that situation. In our circles, couples get together, it's their first time being in such a relationship, and they have limited experience with each other. They have different backgrounds, different families, different personalities, and they're inherently very different because they're different. Men and women are very different. And so it's actually a miracle that a guy and a girl are able to get married with such little knowledge of each other and with such different backgrounds, and then to be able to sort of merge into this new entity called a marriage, and to sort of become one person. And it's an amazing process, but it's good to be aware of how much adjustment is involved in that, and that sometimes there are bumps along the way, especially in the beginning, as as the couple goes through that process of adjusting. Every marriage is unique. extremely so. And every human being is unique, and so you take these two unique human beings and you put them together, and the uniqueness of their relationship is exponentially unique. And going through a marriage is it's a process, like I said before, and it's a process of growth and personal development and discovery, learning about yourself and learning about your spouse and learning about your relationship together. And that process continues throughout your lives, and you're still learning. You're still learning about each other 5, 10, 15 years later, and it's a lifelong process, and it's an amazing process. But in the beginning, that adjustment is probably the hardest, that beginning adjustment, and so it's good to be aware of it, understand that that's part of the normal process. One of the parts that I think is particularly hard is, when you go through this, you find that, you only had limited understanding of what you were getting yourself into, and the person that you're marrying. And as you get to know each other better, you see so many things that you didn't see before. And a lot of times it's really a pleasant surprise to learn as you learn about each other. But there's also a need sometimes for a person to be able to let things go. And that's a really big challenge, because we all start with sort of preconceived notions about what our life is going to be like and what our relationship is going to be like and what our ideal partner in life is going to be like. And in reality, people are what they are, and they have strengths and weaknesses and different things. In some ways, maybe much better than we thought. And in some ways, there might be things that we don't have. Sometimes they're practical, sometimes they're deeper and more profound, but whatever it is, that's part of the process of developing and growing together, is being able to adjust to the reality, and sometimes it requires the ability to see what your reality is and to build on that, but to also sometimes let go of things that were maybe unrealistic, and just ideas that you thought that weren't necessarily real. And that's cool, that's okay, that's part of it, and that's part of what makes us stronger. So something else that is good to know, the way I like to put this is that marriage is like a giant jawbreaker. What I mean by that is that, and this is something that people don't understand before they're in this type of relationship, and a lot of people don't even understand when they're in it. But that if you take a jawbreaker and you throw it at a wall, it's going to go through the wall if you throw it hard enough, because it's so hard. But if you crack it open, what you see is that it's actually made up of hundreds of very, very, very thin layers of sugar. And if you would take each one of those layers out, it would just crumble in your hands. It would be like nothing. But because there are so many layers built into this candy, it's like rock hard, basically. And so in a relationship that's this close and this interconnected and this constant, we're always having interactions and experiences with each other, bigger ones, smaller ones, but many, many different types of interactions, and they accumulate. And when a person has negative experiences in their relationship, they continue to build until there's like this very, very hard shell, and it's very, very difficult to break through. And I think that's one of the challenges that therapists have to deal with, is the amount of negativity that's just covering over that emotional state. And the same thing works the other way around, that when you have consistent positive experiences in your relationship over time, it creates a very, very, very strong relationship that can withstand anything. Another way I like to think of it is like a tree, that when when it's small, it's very flimsy, and then if it's given the right nutrients and water and air and sunlight and everything like that, that little seed could grow into a towering tree that's so powerful that if a truck slammed into it, it would destroy the truck and the tree would be fine. And so in a certain sense, we have to mind our relationship and be aware of this dynamic, that there's a cumulative effect of the interaction of the nature of our marriage, and that we have to build a strong relationship, we have to constantly be building up the experiences in a positive way. But also, like a tree, I think another nice idea that we could extrapolate from that comparison is that it always needs to be tended to. And there's no point in your life, no matter how strong your marriage is, and no matter how good it is, that you could just go on autopilot. Because even a tree that's super, super powerful, if it didn't get rain, and if it didn't get sunlight, and if it didn't get nutrition, the tree would wither and die. And so I think that that's also true in a relationship. And a person can't take that for granted. A person can't take the strength of his relationship or her relationship for granted, and it always needs to be worked on and constantly renewed. So just carrying on, another idea is something I heard from Bobby Scranton, actually, who I was very close with. She once commented to me, she's a very smart lady, she once commented to me that marriage only works when both parties are giving it 100%. One part of the one spouse can't be doing everything. It just stuck with me. I was single at the time. I was years before I got married, but the idea that she said just kind of stuck with me, and I think it's very, very true. That, you know, and not everybody's 100% is not equal. Sometimes it's okay, I think, if one spouse is doing more than the other, if they're more capable of doing it, or, you know, there's different facets to the relationship and what they're doing. Sometimes one party could give more in certain areas, and some other part could do more in other areas, or whatever it might be. It's not that there's a parity in terms of what exactly they're doing, but the point is that they're both fully committed to making it work. They're both fully committed to taking care of things within their relationship and within their lives. And in that sense, a little bit of a similar idea is that I think people maybe sometimes have this notion that, you know, marriage is built from two halves, and you take these two halves and you put them together, and then we have a whole. And I think that that's a mistake. But really, a better way to understand it is that marriage is when you take one whole and another whole, and together they make an even better whole. And that marriage, that relationship that comes from these two people, the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. The dynamic that these two people are going to be able to bring together can make something really, really amazing, beyond anything that either of them, way beyond that either anything could do on their own. But in order for that to really function best, both people have to be whole on their own, meaning emotionally healthy and able to be happy in their own lives. Marriage itself to the other person is not going to take a person who's not whole, who's not happy, who's not complete, and then complete them and make them happy. If a person's coming in with issues, those issues are only going to become bigger in the marriage relationship. And so when a person goes into a relationship like this, they have to understand, people have to understand that each one is responsible for themselves, for their own happiness, for their own decisions, and for their own accomplishments. And when there's individual responsibility, it's so much healthier foundation for the marriage. Obviously, that's a very broad generalization. Real life is much more complicated. There are marriages that are able to work well and function well when there is a codependency. And this is just a platitude, I understand that, but I think it is an idea that's helpful going into marriage, to a relationship, and that is to really understand the need for individual responsibility. And I think another part that kind of comes out of this conversation is sort of like a tricky part of marriage, but the idea of, you know, each person being responsible for their own actions and not for the other person's actions and reactions. There is, I think, a real nisayon to try to control your spouse. And that could happen in many different levels. It could happen spiritually, it could happen practically, it could happen in so many different things. But just to keep it simple, let's talk about the idea of like ruchnius and growth and those types of areas which we've been talking about, although it just as equally applies to other areas, that trying to control another person is not possible and not healthy. And but on the other hand, there is an idea of a couple being responsible for each other and helping each other. And so it's really about finding that balance between being able to support somebody and to be able to help them grow. And sometimes that means, telling them what you think, and that's okay. But it's much better, obviously, if it's coming from a place of trying to be supporting them and to be helping them and to be giving them positive feedback, or reinforcement or whatever it might be, as opposed to feeling like I have the right to control. Like Hashem doesn't control people. Hashem gives them bechira. So if Hashem doesn't control them, why would one person think that they should be able to control another person? Um, so so that's just some practical ideas I think that are important as we get into this relationship, and so many different things come up. It's so complex, and there's so many different situations and so many different areas, and a lot of times people mean really really well, but they overstep their boundaries, and sometimes creating resentment or frustration or whatever it might be. And so you have to really be very very careful to I think to promote this idea of individuality and autonomy, at the same time the togetherness and being in it together. And it's also not good if a person is just totally not concerned and not involved and not worried about the totality of their relationship and their marriage and their home. And it becomes more complicated with kids. It becomes more complicated when when the things that we're doing are affecting the avirah in the house and the way the kids behave, and then it really becomes tricky. But at the same time, this balance is very very important. Um, so another topic that I wanted to talk a little about, which kind of flows from this idea, is the idea of conflict and conflict resolution in marriage. You're young, you're Mirza Hashem getting married, you're really, really nice and good people, and I really, I'm really like, I'm not trying to suggest that there will be conflict or whatever, but the reality is that in life and in marriage, there's pretty much always, it's a guarantee that there's going to be conflict, because there's different personalities and different needs and different ideas and different wants. And as you live your life together, conflict pretty much in almost all you know situations is something that people deal with. I once bought a card. It's funny, I bought this card for Yocheved and David on their first anniversary, and it's still sitting in my house. I never gave it to them. But it says that these two old couples sitting on a bench, a man and a woman, and it says, Marge and Jerry were married for 45 years and they never argued. What was their secret? And then you open the card, it says they were married to other people. But if you are married, then conflict is part of it. I think there's a popular psychologist, I don't remember who it is, so whatever, if it is or it isn't, but I think he said that one of the things that defines successful couples is that they're able to resolve conflicts in a positive way. I think that's very, I don't know if it's where I got that idea from, but I do think it's very true, that this is one of the essential qualities of a good relationship, is to be able to have conflict in a productive way. And so so the first thing, getting back to the midos and to the selflessness, I think that when there's a conflict, there are four basic ways that it could happen. One is that each party wants to do what they want. The next way is that both parties could do what the wife wants, or both parties could do what the husband wants. And I think those are all b'diavad. The best way is when each party wants to do what the other person wants. And when they're trying to make each other happy and to be a mensch and to be mitiv, and like I said before, the midos and the hatava and the wanting to, the sensitivity and wanting to make the other person happy, that's really that's a beautiful way in which a husband and a wife could act towards each other, which is each one wanting to do what the other one wants, and like they're almost like arguing, like I want to do what you want and you want to do what I want, and like how could we, that's the best way for couples to interact with each other. Not that that's always possible, but just, I think as a paradigm, that's a good thing to be aware of. As it could be the most simple basic things, but like, do we always want to do what I want? Do we always want to do what you want? And again, like that's part of what I meant earlier when I said that, like, when their midos are there, it helps develop trust. When a person knows that their spouse always wants to make them happy and do what they want, then they're able to give much more freely. They don't have to fight for their space and fight for their everything that they want, because they know the person they're living with is there to take care of them and there to help them. Um, um, but anyway, and conflict is not always just the differences of opinion. Sometimes it could be where something happens, something happens or didn't happen, and one person could be, hurt by it or upset about it or whatever it might be. And so, so just some thoughts on conflict resolution. I'm not the expert on this. I'm not an expert on any of these things. I'm certainly not going to be able to give an exhaustive, but there are just some points that I think are helpful that, in my experience, And so, again, I want to share that with you. One thing is to know that the importance of shalom in marriage is so huge. Because I'll say that shalom is a kli that's machzik bracha, and if a person wants to have bracha, they need to have shalom. And again, like I said before, having shalom is necessary, and it's part of shleimus, and it's part of why we're put in this world. To work in a way that's proper midos and hatava and etc. But also to recognize, especially when it comes to like a family and children, that the stability and emotional health that a person is able to create in their home is going to create a stronger family and healthier children and a happier life. And so a person has to realize the importance of shalom at all times, and how much mesiras nefesh they have to be willing to put into that. So that's for starters. So I think what I would really say the important thing about conflict resolution is that an important skill is that a person is able to be in a state of negativity for whatever reason that they might be there, and to be able to get from that place to being in a place of positive feelings. That's what that's the essence of conflict resolution. And how a person gets from one place to another place is how they get there, but that's what really needs to happen. So I think a lot of people think that the way that we resolve conflicts in life is by communicating, and we need to talk about how we feel, and one person might need to apologize, or both people maybe need to apologize, and then we can bury the hatchet and we can be happy again. And so I don't think that's wrong. I think that's maybe in a lot of cases true and important. And certainly, it's menschlich to be able to apologize when someone else is hurt. But it's not necessarily the only way, or maybe not even necessarily the best way, because it is possible for a person on their own to get past a negative feeling and to say, to be able to put a perspective on what happened, and to be able to put a bigger perspective on everything else that's going on in their life and their whole situation, and to be able to just wipe whatever it was away and move on and just be happy. And if a person can do that, or if a couple could do that, it's an amazing thing. It's a pretty high madriga, I think. But it's not necessarily true that there's a mitzvah of having to like have this whole big conversation every time somebody's is hurt. Some people may need that, and maybe that's maybe that is necessary. But I think it's important to recognize also this that the key is to be able to resolve that conflict, is to be able to get back to where you need to be, and that could come from an internal work. And I think that's really maybe the highest madrega, that you wronged a person, like you think about a big tzaddik, like someone wronged them, and like it's kilu, like it didn't happen at all. Like they love the person, they're makabel everything from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They see so much simcha and avas Yisrael that like they're able to they're just happy. It's like it's not even like it happened. And if a person could work on themselves in their marriage and through their marriage to get to that, I think that's even lechatchila way of resolving a conflict. There's obviously room and a place and sometimes a need for communication, and that's a lot. Part of that's also just learning to live together and to understand each other. And I'm not trying to say that that's not also important. But again, having a lev tov is such an amazing skill, and to be able to do that requires a lot of work sometimes, a lot of self-control. And I think that may be one of the areas where we say, like, marriage takes a lot of work. Like this aspect of like being able to process a negative emotion or hurt or whatever it might be, and to get through it and to get past it, that takes a lot of work sometimes. And I'm just saying this because I think it's important to be aware of that and to try to work on yourself and to realize how valuable and how meaningful it is. A lot of times when a person has negativity, they realize like they're the ones that are suffering most from it, and it doesn't help anything. And there's many other ideas to think about in terms of how a person could get themselves into a more positive state, but also sometimes it just takes time, and you have to give yourself sometimes the time to be able to do that and to get back to the feeling of love. But on the other hand, I do want to say that it is important to not allow negativity to fester, because when a person has a negative experience and it's not dealt with and it's not addressed, then even if it wears off and then they go back to doing their thing and they're back to their equilibrium, the negativity is still there under the surface. And like I mentioned earlier about how the relationship sometimes is a product of many, many, many experiences, when negativity is allowed to exist under the surface, it does build up and it does create resentment, and it could create a lot of negative emotions. So you have to be aware of your own needs, and to be able to get through and process the negative feelings and get them out of your system, to address them and to process them and to deal with them. And so sometimes that does require conversation, sometimes with each other, sometimes maybe with somebody else. But if a person is going to like get over something without having to talk about it, it's important that they're honest with themselves and be able to truly like feel good inside and not hold on to that resentment. So just something to be aware of. So there's just some practical thoughts. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say in this area. So I guess in closing, before we get to the last section, I just want to get back to the first idea, and I want to share just two quick chazal. The first is a really amazing shmooze that the author has. It's called Bito Yamuna in Arat Safan, and he says that in the Torah, we know from the Midrashim that the Avram Avinu had so many amazing accomplishments in his early life. He recognized the Kadosh Baruch Hu, he opposed his family, he opposed his country and his king, he was thrown into the Kivshan Eish, etc., etc. And when you open the Torah, there's no mention of any of that. Breaking the idols. All we have in the Torah is Avram's chesed, Avram having guests and wanting to have guests after his bris, and running to slaughter animals and serve them, and his loyalty to Lot. Why is it that the Torah goes into such detail about Avram's chesed and like his great accomplishments of emunah? Like it's not there at all. So this is the author's question, and the author says that all we know about Kadosh Baruch Hu is his midos, and when a person appreciates Hakadosh Baruch Hu and wants to be davek to him, and he will want to act in the ways of Hashem. And so the greatest testament to Avram's great emunah was not his kivshon ha'esh, but it was actually his midos tovos. And so when a person, acts, we think about serving Hashem in our lives, and we think about all the from things that we do, and all the chumras, and all the mitzvahs, and all the davening, and the learning. One of the overarching things that a person needs to do if they want to serve Hashem in life is to be a mitiv, and to be a mensch, and to be act in midos, with midos tovos, and to give and to do for others. And the place that we do this most is our marriage. Shiva was medayik from the Chovos Halavavos. He says that somewhere in the Chovos Halavavos, I didn't look it up recently, but he says that a person is supposed to is supposed to examine his actions towards his family, and that the basis for that is v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So Shiva will ask the question, sort of like the way I treat my wife and my children should be because of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. He said if I treat my wife, and he said this kind of as a joke, he said if I treat my family like my neighbor would be a churban. He's like, I hate my neighbor. He says, what does it mean v'ahavta l'recha kamocha? That's how I treat my wife. So he said that the basis for interpersonal relationships is this idea of being selfless, and this idea of caring for other people and wanting to do good for other people. And it has to be not just that I do it for my own family, but that I am a person that does good for all other people. That's how the midah of hatava, the midah of being a good person, is fully matriculated in a person's personality when he has this feeling towards all of the people. What about his wife and his children? So he says, Kol HaKarav Karav Yosar. The more close to a person is, they get a greater dose of that. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So again, getting into a marriage is a huge thing, and having children is a very serious responsibility. But if we go into it in this way, you don't have to be. I think this focus really takes away a lot of the anxiety, because, really this matters, and it's in our hands, it's in our ability to be successful and to be happy. When it comes to, the bracha in the house, and the shalom, and the sense of security and safety and simcha and ava, and the love that grows out of this marriage, it's founded on these principles more than anything else. And Chazal teach us that when a person is involved in creating a child, when a couple is involved in creating a child, the sense of love and the sense of unity and the sense of devotion that they have to each other, the ava and the simcha, has a tremendous impact on the offspring that's brought about by that union. And the Gemara talks about the nine midos, and basically the idea is like if there's a katata, or a lack of togetherness, or lack of simcha, lack of devotion, then these things translate into flaws, into either physical or spiritual or personality or whatever it might be, flaws in their children. So it's so important to recognize the impact of our actions, especially in that area in general, but especially in that area, that the love that we engender and the togetherness that we engender and the selflessness that we engender really it is so impactful in the future, and our doros, and our offspring. And it's pretty intense, pretty serious stuff, but it's pretty it's big leagues here. So with that, I would like to just get into the topic a little bit of intimacy, and talk about some just very basic things. So as much as I'm not an expert in the relationship side, less of an expert in this, I'm not someone who deals with people too much in this area. So just keep that in mind, as I kind of share a little bit of what I've learned, and what I've learned from living, and from observing, and from reading. Um, but I think, a little bit of advice could go a long way. I'm not going to necessarily get into so much detail here, but just a little bit of advice, like I said, I think could be very helpful. So the first thing I would like to say on this topic is that you should be aware that the reality of intimacy, in especially in marriage and in this type of situation, is very different than the way it's portrayed in culture. Um, so I think it's very helpful to be aware of that, and to also be aware that couples, when they, every couple, I would say, has a different experience. As much as the relationship is this unique, special place that the chassan and kala and the husband and wife occupy, there are other people that are part of, maybe in a side way, but part of their relationship. They have family, parents, friends, children, and so they have their unique relationship that's a special place for them. But there's also other people that are privy to it, that are part of it. But the part of the relationship that's their intimacy, that's really a very private world that only the two of them know anything about. It's a very, very special place. Um, but when they get there, you know, every couple has a different experience, and I think that there's a big range of what it's like, especially in the beginning. Some people have an easier time, and some people have more challenges, and sometimes there are challenges in this area in the beginning, especially, and it's a big adjustment. I tend to think that just from what I understand of the world, that it's a harder it tends to be a harder transition for the woman often, but it could be for the man too. So it's definitely a transition, and sometimes it doesn't work as well in the beginning, and that's okay, and that's also part of it. But again, for some people, I think it works very well. For some people, I think it doesn't work as well, and for some people, it can be very, very challenging. But it's important to recognize that the long term goal of having a successful intimate relationship, it's not dependent on necessarily how that starts off in the marriage. Because I think that there's a lot of people who could, have very, very good, you know, dynamics in this area, and then later on through the course of their marriage, it ends up being disaster and very, very problematic. And the same thing is true on the other side. I think some couples could struggle in the beginning, but work through their issues and grow in their relationship and grow in their marriage with proper mitos and sometimes maybe help, and can end up having a very, very successful and amazing intimate life together. And so, what intimacy is, it's important to understand that it's an outgrowth of the general context of the relationship. It is a unique part of the relationship, but it's not its own independent thing. It's part of the whole relationship. And what intimacy, a lot of it is based on, is the love and the trust and the closeness and the desire to do good and make each other happy, and the strength of that love in the relationship that's going to be the foundation for successful and continued lifelong intimacy. Um, and so I think it's important to come into it with an open mind, to try not to have clear expectations of what to expect. And there needs to be a lot of sensitivity towards each other, and patience and trust, and to just go through it together with those things in mind, and work from there, and hopefully work together towards being successful. Um, One of the things that's necessary in successful intimacy, that is the ability for the couple to be able to be vulnerable to each other, because you're in your most vulnerable state. And so that, again, like I mentioned earlier, is so dependent on trust and love, and allows a person to fully open themselves up to another person. Um, another um, another I think important idea is that we have loyalty to each other in a marriage, and the couple has a sense of obligation, and that sense of obligation includes um, the responsibility to be intimate. And um, there are sometimes challenges, and sometimes they could be coming from many, many different places. But wherever they do come from, we have a responsibility in our marriage. This is an extremely, extremely important part of a successful marriage, and that we have to commit ourselves to being there and doing what we need to do to be successful, and pushing ourselves sometimes um, to work on whatever the barriers might be, to achieve intimacy. And so each partner in the relationship needs to not just have spontaneity and love and desire that just comes by itself, but to also feel that there's a need for commitment and responsibility to make that part of it work. And I think that's an important piece that needs to be there. It's also just a little bit, a very basic idea, for us to understand how men and women are different in general. I mean, this is true in general relationship, but it's even maybe more so true in this area. And that is that in general, women are more relational and tend to be, for the most part, and they're very sensitive to social cues and the way a person acts. And the way a woman feels is not based on what happened last week or the whole context of our relationship, all the good things that we do together, all the good. It's how they feel now, how they feel today. And for a woman to feel good, she needs to be given the attention and respect and regard and love that her husband feels towards her. And in an immediate sense, not just right then, but throughout the day or throughout the week, and to continuously leading up to the time of being intimate, in order for her to be interested. And so there's a build up there, and it's important for the husband to understand that and to appreciate it, and to have the wisdom and understanding of how to develop that. And then when it comes to intimacy itself, that process continues. A woman doesn't come into it ready to go, whereas a man, from step one, he's there, he's ready to go. That's not how a woman is, and she gets there one step at a time, and she doesn't necessarily even know how to get to the next step. And so together you have to, I guess, be open and be sensitive and just be in the moment, and for the husband to realize that it takes time to develop that, and it takes being aware of where she's at and how to give her whatever it is that she needs at the moment. And it could be, like I said, it's part of the relationship thing. It's not necessarily just a physical thing, but in order to be able to go from step to step, and to just be aware of that. On the other hand, men are not like that. Men are much more aware of the bigger context. They're not as dependent on emotions, and usually they start off ready to go, and it requires restraint a lot of times from the standpoint of the man. But it's also important for the woman to understand how men work. And but I think that in this part of the relationship in particular, the responsibility is more on the man than the woman, although they both have to be responsible. But I think that there's a greater responsibility of a man to understand that what a woman's temperament is like, to be able to help her get to where she needs to be in order to be able to be in that place together. Like I said, it goes both ways, the awareness. And I think that this is also, again, things that I've read. It's not my own chidushim here, but in the way that men and women are different, a woman gets to intimacy through closeness. Closeness is a prerequisite for her to want to be intimate. For a man, it's just the opposite. a man gets to closeness very much to a large extent through intimacy. And, a man might feel love and feel close or whatever, but he's not connecting with that closeness. It's not as open to him. His heart is not open to him, generally speaking. And through intimacy, it opens him up very much to his wife. On the other hand, the wife is the other way around. It's the opposite. So if it's kind of like an inherent conflict in the way that men and women work to, like, which one comes first, the cart or the horse. And so that's why I said I think the onus to a large extent is on the man, because he's there and she's not. But she also has to recognize that, the way to open up his heart sometimes is for him to have fulfillment in this area. And so, if they're both aware of each other's needs, it helps them to understand how to behave with each other. There are some very good books that talk about how to be successful. I'm not going to go through all those details. Not that I would be necessarily the right person to do it, but I do think that reading about this is important. And there's a sefer called Ol Rachel, which is in English, which probably could get online. There's also a sefer called Mishkan Yisrael. And then there's a third book, which is kind of based on those books a little bit, which is called Marital Intimacy, written by Carrie Friedman. All good books. I think it's good to read and to learn about the approach of the Torah and Chazal, and to how to know again to be successful in intimacy. So one thing I want to also mention is that there's a lot of halachas involved in how a husband and wife are supposed to act and behave in this area. So I think it's very important to recognize the need for these restrictions, and that person should deal in these areas of Kedusha with restraint and with purity. And the restraint and the purity and the proper approach and keeping Taras HaMishpacha are very, very important tools to having lifelong success and intimacy. But on the other hand, it's also important for there to be openness and freedom and the ability to explore your needs in this area. So I'm sure you've learned these in the process of being engaged and getting ready for marriage. I'm certainly not your rabbi, but I do want to say that I think it's good to be aware that there's probably more flexibility in the halacha than you realize. And it's important to have the ability to ask shilos, and not just to assume things are usur. And to have a person, it's good in marriage in general, especially in these areas, in Taras HaMishpacha and in intimacy shilos and family planning, to have a person that you trust that's competent halachic authority, but also understands you and understands, situations that you're, that you feel comfortable with, to be able to ask shilos to. So I think I'll just end off this section with that. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about, I think, a very complicated and sensitive area, but probably not as nogay at the earlier stages of marriage. But since we're having this conversation, I want to talk about this area, which I think is important for couples to work on and to be aware of. And again, I'm not an authority on these subjects. I'm just giving you some ideas. But some food for thought and some things that I think are important. And this area is dealing with the outside world as a couple and dealing with individuals of the opposite gender. I think that we need to be aware when we get into this type of relationship, a committed relationship and a love relationship, an intimate relationship, that we're surrounded in this world by lots of other people, and Hashem created in a human being a very strong need and a strong desire to be close to other people. Normal people are attracted to people by nature of the opposite gender. And people are amazing. People are beautiful, and people are charismatic, and people are wonderful and engaging. And the fact that a person is in a committed relationship does not protect them from having attraction to other people. And it's important to be aware of that. And this works both ways. It's important to understand that it's normal. It's normal for men and women to be attracted to other men and women, despite the fact that they're married, and that's normal. But it's also important to recognize that that's a great danger, and that there's such a thing, I think, as, in my opinion at least, as infidelity in the heart and in the mind. And it's improper for a person in a committed relationship to even if it's not in an action way, but to even have thoughts about somebody else. But we are human, and that is also, we have to give each other space to be normal human beings. But we also have to be responsible to each other, even in the area of thinking and feeling. And what really prevents issues in this area in marriage is not love, and it's not commitment, and it's not loyalty, and it's not dedication. More than anything else, it's having proper gedarim and how we live our lives. Once a person gets into a situation, the nature is very, very strong, and it's basically nearly impossible for a person to put themselves in a bad situation and for bad things not to happen. Even if it's not action based, like I said, but it could just be in the thought. But certainly it could go from there. Where we have control is before these things happen. When we're not in a makom of nisayon, we have control, and we have to be aware of the nisayon and to live our lives in such a way that our marriage is safe and that we protect ourselves. And this is the wisdom of Chazal. Chazal say that a person has to be misrachik from nashim ma'od ma'od. It's brought down in Chosishus. And that's truly the key to maintaining a relationship. So Rashiva gave a gather, and this knows no bounds, and there are no lines that are inviolable, that can't be crossed if we're not careful. And so the Rashiva gave a gather that married couples that are not siblings or close relatives shouldn't have each other over for a meal more than twice a year. So I think that's an important get there. You have friends, she has friends. It's very normal for you guys, now that you're married, to want to get together and hang out. And that's really not so good and could lead to a lot of problems. But it's also okay and normal to have a Shabbos meal with your friends. But there needs to be gedarim. And so that gather the Rashiva gave, I think, at least in the Kolal years, is probably, I think the Rashiva was referring to specifically for friends in Kolal. And I think the Rashiva felt that there's more danger there because of the fact that they're so close and that they spend so much time together. I think maybe after Kolal it could be a little bit more, perhaps. That's something that needs Shaila. But this gather the Rashiva gave was twice a year. I don't know what they say in Yeshiva nowadays. I don't know if it changed or not, but I think that's a good gather. Another thing that I think people should be aware of is just the idea of socializing. There's really no room in halacha and in hashkafa for men and women to be engaging each other in conversation that is not necessary. And we should really be careful about ourselves that we don't engage in that. A lot of times it could happen, very innocently with a coworker or a neighbor or whatever it is, that just schmoozing, being friends, and over time, the conversations might get longer. It might get, and so basically the together, I think, is that you have to be a menschlich, and you have to be able to speak to this person like they're normal, and God treat them with respect, but it should just be tachlis and very short and very to the point, and it shouldn't be conversation for the sake of just talking and schmoozing and socializing. Men should socialize with men, and women should socialize with women. It doesn't matter if they're married. And another major gather that's super important is the gather of yichud. And yichud has to be something that you really maintain 100%. And it's mentioned in the halacha that is the big siba of problems. And if a person keeps yichud, it really prevents a lot of issues. And the way Gedarim work, this is also something to be aware of, is that you don't keep a Geder only when it makes sense. A Geder is something that you keep no matter what. So even if it's, a yichud, a person shouldn't think if it's a cleaning lady who's 25 years older than you and very unattractive and doesn't speak English, then it's okay. Because once you're poured together in any area, it becomes easier for that boundary to move. And so really need to be careful about these Gedarim, social Gedarim and yichud especially. And I think it's important to realize, I talked earlier about in a marriage that there needs to be autonomy and individual responsibility. In this area, I think there is a stronger need for there to be mutual responsibility. I think it's okay for couples, and not just young couples, but any age couples, to be watching over each other in this area and looking over each other's shoulders and making sure that everything is okay in this area and being able to ask questions. And it doesn't mean that you don't trust. It's just something that couples need to be able to do, to be able to be open and honest about these types of things, and to, in a non-threatening way, to be able to ask these questions and to reassure themselves that the other person is not having any issues. And so I think that's healthy and good, but people have to recognize that that doesn't mean that you don't trust, the other person doesn't trust you, and if you ask your husband or wife about it, doesn't mean that you don't trust them. And it's actually like, keeping each other safe, and it's important. The way I like to think of it a little bit is like teammates. Like if two people are on an NBA team, they realize that each person on the team needs to really invest, to be able to be successful, or an NFL team or whatever it is, to be eating properly, to be working out, to learning the plays, to doing the workouts and exercises, and to be there and not goofing off and not eating badly and not sleeping, going to sleep too late or whatever it might be. And so, if you want to be successful and really want to win, you have to be responsible for each other, and if you see an important teammate who's slacking off or doesn't have it together, you may want to sit them down and talk to them and be like, hey, we need to straighten this out. And that doesn't mean that you don't trust them or you don't appreciate them, but you just care too much for the team to allow anything to happen that could jeopardize your success. And the same thing I think is true in this area and in marriage. Another area that's very, very important is the area of technology. So technology is great and has a lot of purpose and is oftentimes necessary. It's also very, very destructive in many areas of life, but in particular in marriages. And unfortunately, we hear lots and lots of stories about marriages that are affected really negatively by exposure to technology on many, many, many levels. And so I think it's really, really important to recognize the dangers there. I think it's a beautiful thing if people could have, kosher phones where you can have a smartphone that does everything you need to do. You could do your banking and your maps and your Uber and your, whatever it might be, practical stuff, emails and stuff like that, WhatsApp. But to not have browsers, to not have social media, and to not have those things, and as long as you can manage that, you need to sometimes have a different computer that you're able to conduct business on and to shop and to do other things like that. But your cell phone, if it could be a kosher cell, it's like super, super important and a good thing if possible to be able to do that. Another idea, which I do, and I decided to do this from day one. Jandy and I decided to do this, and I think it was a really cool idea, and I would recommend it, is that we don't have separate accounts. We don't have separate email accounts. We have one email account, and it's both of our accounts. And any email that goes to her goes to me. And if anyone wants to say anything to her, they could say it to me. We don't have private emails. And I think that's just a nice way to kind of have togetherness. And it's not just in emails, but other types of accounts. We just have one together, and we each see what the other person's doing. We do actually have work accounts that are separate, but that's just strictly for work. But I think that people develop a certain protectiveness over their personal cell phone, if they have it, and it's a very personal thing. It's your own, and if someone picks up your cell phone, you must feel all my personal things are on there. What do you, you don't want someone else looking through your cell phone, kind of. which is part of the whole addiction of cell phones, which is an insanely addictive device. Um, but I think it's also helpful, like, or healthy in a relationship to not have that. And like we certainly do in our relationship, Shandy and I, that our cell phones are property of both of us. Like she always knows my password, and I always know hers, and she will often just take my cell phone and use it for whatever reason she might be, or she might even just like look through my phone, like she might see my text that my friends are sending me or WhatsApps or whatever it might be. And the idea is not to be snooping and to looking over my shoulder, but it's just like curiosity or whatever it is. And I think it's a healthy thing to have that awareness, to be able, and the same thing with me for her. And again, like it's not coming from a lack of trust. It's coming from just an openness, and I think it's healthy. And I think it's a good practice. Not that necessarily anyone has to or whatever. It's just the thought that I think it's something that I want to share. But in general, I think this is a topic that needs to be something that we're aware of, and that that we're constantly working on. So one other point on this before I just wrap it up is talking about yichud. I meant to mention this earlier, but it's a practical eitzah that I heard once, which I think it's worth sharing. I once asked a very big Rav in Queens. I called him up to ask him a yichud shayla. At the time, I was fairly young, newly married, and I needed to get some work done in the apartment, and I wanted to have a worker come over when Shady was going to be there. And so I called up this Rav to ask him, whether it was a problem of yichud, how to get around the problem of yichud. And what he told me was, he said, I don't care about what the halachos of yichud are, what they're us or whatever. He said, just tell you this piece of advice. Never ever let a worker in your house when your wife is there, if you're not there. Just don't ever do it. And he said that what he experiences in his rabbanus, so many different like terrible stories that happen that no one knows about because these things are not shared widely. They come from that type of a situation. So it's just a practical piece of advice that I learned. Again, it doesn't mean nothing to do with trust. I don't know exactly how the problems come about. I don't know if it's whatever it might be, but it sounds like that's something that that he shared with me. I think it's good advice to share. Always be very, very careful about who you let in your house, and in general that the husband should always be around. And again, like I said, this is not neurotic. This is not trusting your wife. This is not, being medieval. It's just something that he said out of his advice, and something that I think, I live by. And I think it's just an important episode. And of course, we should never know from any such problems, but it's good to be aware, because if you don't hear this like that, you would never hear about it, because anytime anything happens, no one publicizes it. So just to share that last bit. And then finally, just to kind of wrap it up, I think that marriage is a big all about growth. It's a tremendous growth opportunity in life. I think that knowing how much of it is in your hands, and knowing about how much of it is dependent on midos and dependent on self-development, could really help a couple go into a marriage with less anxiety, realizing that it's in your hands and it's very doable. And if we act and we live our lives in the proper way, we're going to be successful. And it's not so much, to me, I've always felt like it's not so important to where a person is holding in life, but what direction they're going in. And wherever you're holding, if you're not growing, you're going to end up losing your madrega. And wherever you're holding, if you are growing, you'll eventually achieve greatness. And it's really important in life to always be focused on growing and developing, and no greater vehicle than marriage. And I think if I could successfully convey one idea in this whole conversation, more than anything else that I've said so far, is that it's super important to always be learning Musar. The importance of learning Musar cannot be overstated. Rabbi Yisrael says that every Jew, no matter what, man, woman, rich, poor, sick, healthy, every person has an obligation to learn Musar every day. Now, I don't know if every day is something that's doable for us, But if most of the time we're involved in learning Musar, we learn Musar most of the time, it's literally life changing, and it's the only way that a person could truly, serve Hashem properly and grow properly in life is if there's a constant focus on learning Musar, and it really has to be for everybody something that they do regularly. I can't recommend that enough. It was something that the Rosh Yeshiva always pushed. And it was interesting, like we used to have these sessions with the Rosh Yeshiva, like question and answer. And I remember like people would sometimes ask him like if it's okay for a couple to go to therapy. Which is a strange question, but whatever. People ask weird questions to Rosh Yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva, the way he answered that question, I saw the way he answered that question was he would say, he was kind of like joking, like, what do you need therapy for? Just open him Mesilas Yesharim, just learn Musar. I don't think the Rosh Yeshiva actually meant that if a couple's really struggling and they need help, they should just learn Musar and not go to therapy if they have real issues or personality issues or whatever it might be. But I think what he was trying to say is that if a person learns Musar and a person works on themselves, then they should have a good relationship and they should have a good marriage. And so, what can I say? I think it's really, really key to be successful in life and in relationships, especially in marriage. So with that being said, I would like to wish you again a Mazel Tov. Thank you for listening. If you did listen to this, and I hope there's something in here that could be beneficial. I would like to wish you Hatzlacha and success and bracha and happiness in everything you do, and it should be healthy, and you should be blessed with all the brachos. And I think also, actually, I forgot to mention this before, but in closing, the importance of tefillah. Tefillah is so important. A chassan and kala need to be davening for their relationship, and they need to be davening for their children. And there are actually tefillos. If you have the Sefer, I think it's called All Yisrael. Actually, over here, let me just make sure I got the name right. Sorry, wrong name. All Aryeh. He actually has a tefillah to say before intimacy from the Ramban, I think, which I think is a beautiful thing to do. But in general, tefillah is so important also, and really, really works. Hashem's there, Hashem listens, and you need to sometimes daven to merit to get the brachos that you're supposed to get. So, Mirza Hashem, with our tefillos and with your tefillos, with our focus on growing as people and individuals, we should be zocha to build a bias now and be Yisrael. Mazel tov.